and welcome to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. Syria's raging civil war. Without question, this conflict has turned into a proxy war involving regional players and Western powers. How has this civil war changed the geopolitics of Syria's neighborhood? Will Syria ever be the same again? And who are the likely winners? To discuss the Syrian puzzle, I'm joined by David Swanson in Charlottesville. He's an author and blogger. And in Los Angeles, we cross to Christian Whitten. He is the principal with DC International Advisory and a former State Department senior advisor. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Christian, you got up earliest for this program, so I'll go to you first. This is turning into a proxy war. And because it is a proxy war, it will be prolonged. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I'm not sure it's a proxy war yet. I mean, the United States and other Western powers are certainly on the side of the rebels now. The French and the Brits particularly outspoken. President Obama just coming in yesterday and defining a red line by which the United States itself would go to war. He drew that red line over the use or movement of chemical weapons, but certainly you've had jousting of major parties. You've had the U.S. and Russia cross swords in New York, with Russia and China delaying or obstructing action in the UN Security Council, and other powers sort of looking for workarounds to get international powers to work.
Obstructing what Western powers want to do in Syria. Let's be clear.
That's correct. Yes. Right. Yes. Well, something that would dislodge the Assad government and bring pressure to bear on Assad.
All right. We'll talk about the future of the Assad regime. David, what do you think about that? I mean, it is a proxy war, and the West has chosen sides. That will prolong this conflict.
Absolutely, that's right. Not just Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but the United States, the United Kingdom, and France are on one side in this war. And Russia and China are absolutely right to insist on resisting that effort and to propose a ceasefire, although wrong, of course, to be arming the Assad regime, as the powers on the other side are wrong to be arming the resistance. Just as the U.S. government was wrong several years ago to be sending our prisoners over to Assad's regime to have him torture them.
Okay. Christian, what do you think about the rebels? Okay, are these Jeffersonian Democrats in your mind? Why are we supporting them? Why are Western powers, why are they supporting them to the extent they are? And arming them, by the way.
Well, right, but a lot of questions there. Throughout Arab Spring, this has been the big question, who the rebels are, and I think it's important to realize they're diverse, just as they're diverse in Egypt, diverse in Libya, and now diverse here. I mean, there are some very unappealing elements among them, including some al-Qaeda, although those numbers are probably pretty small. There probably is a large contingent that is aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood, which I'd argue is also very dangerous to the interests of countries who want a civilized order in the Middle East going forward, but a certain number of them, and we've seen this in Libya, especially the new government in Libya, and perhaps hopefully in Syria, although maybe not probably in Syria, is a number of secularists, people who just want accountable government, separation of mosque and state, and an end to the repression that Assad has had on Syria and his father has had on Syria.
You know, David, it seems to me that these rebel groups, okay, these different groups here, they're all against Assad, but once he goes, and he may eventually go, it will just be everyone against everyone. That's what it looks like to me.
If he goes, which is not at all clear, it will be a chaotic disaster. You will have the Kurds seeking independence. You will have a victory for a very mixed and divided group, including many fanatical religious terrorists. You have this odd situation of the U.S. government supporting, as it did in Afghanistan decades gone by, religious fanatics, Muslims, against, among others, the Christian groups in Syria. You are going to have bitter resentment from the Assad supporters. I mean, the opposition does not have the sort of public support it claims, which is why you have these threats to turn toward al-Qaeda-aligned groups if the NATO nations don't step up, which is a threat that the U.S. and NATO ought not to listen to. We ought to pay close attention to an opposition that is considering and is in fact working with these types of groups right now. I mean, that, if nothing else, ought to be a red flag that says, back off here.
Okay, Christian, what do you think about that? The learning curve here is pretty flat. Afghanistan.
Well, you know, change is probably going to happen, and again, as with other provinces in Arab Spring, you know, in the early days of Egypt, it was pretty clear that Mubarak's days were numbered. As a rebel army moved slowly across Libya toward Tripoli, it was pretty clear that Gaddafi was going to go. So the rest of the world can sort of make a choice either to try and manage and influence events in Syria, or we can just stand by, lament the possibility that things will go terribly wrong, and just let events run their course. I'd argue that we should manage the way events goes, and that, frankly,
okay, how?
the way
Give me an
to do
example.
that is to
What's a
arm
winning
the elements
strategy?
of the rebels.
What's a winning strategy? Because if the past is a guide, you know, the future doesn't look good. Because every single intervention has been a failure. Go ahead.
Not every intervention has been a failure. Certainly, the NATO operation in Libya was a success.
Oh, okay. Well, the Libyans feel that way. David, go ahead. You want to jump in? Please do.
Well, Libya is out of the news, but it's not out of the chaotic rampaging of militant groups. Libya is not a democratic paradise with independence for its nation at this point. Neither is Iraq, neither is Afghanistan, neither are dozens of nations across Latin America and Asia. I mean, we have yet to have a successful intervention on its own terms, unless we go back to Japan and Germany, which were absolutely leveled, and we haven't left yet. I mean, the idea that Syria is going to be the exception to the rule, is going to be the one place where we have military intervention from the West and it does the nation and the region good, requires an extreme amount of evidence that we haven't seen yet. And the idea that we have a choice of doing nothing or intervening with bombs from NATO planes is absolutely outrageous. We have the opportunity to pursue a ceasefire, to pursue negotiations, to pursue disarmament, and a cooling of hostilities.
Christian, do you really think that was tried? Do you think that was really tried? Christian, do you really, sincerely?
I think so.
When Clinton says Assad must go, when Clinton says Assad must go, that was negotiations? Really?
I think we tried this. I think Kofi Annan, on behalf of the United Nations, on behalf of the Arab League, went and sipped tea with Assad numerous times. He went and talked to the Iranians, the chief sponsor and proxy of the Syrians. He said he had a ceasefire. Assad said there was a ceasefire, and then there wasn't a ceasefire. You know, going back, though, I think the way to influence events in Syria is to arm the rebels, the factions of the rebels who are most secularist and most against the Islamists. And if you look at places where we have done this, where we've provided arms or directly aided freedom fighters, you know, things actually have worked out pretty well. If you look at Iraq, if you look at Afghanistan, if you look at places like Panama, Grenada, you had dictatorships replaced by democracy. Now, democracy is turbulent, especially in its earlier years, but the key difference is that the people there are free now. And if you look at the most recent intervention in Libya, Libya is going very well. There are still problems. There are still growing pains, but you have a parliamentary democracy. You have a new executive coming together who's not an Islamist, who wants accountability, the separation of mosque and state, even if they don't quite call it that. So there's actually a very good record of giving people the means to defend themselves and to secure their own freedom. That's actually
David,
preferable.
How do you think about bombing people to democracy?
I think is absolutely outrageous, with all due respect, for someone in Los Angeles to declare for the Iraqi people or the Libyan people or the Panamanian or Grenadian people that they are better off when they say otherwise. If you ask the people of Iraq, they will say they are worse off. I mean, we have destroyed that society. We have ruined its infrastructure.
I'm sure they really miss Saddam Hussein. I'm sure the Panamanians really miss Noriega.
Okay, Christian, go ahead. I mean,
this is not, no, the option is not love the dictator that we were supporting and decided to turn against, or love the bombs. These are not the two choices in the world. You do not have to believe that Saddam Hussein was a good government in order to regret and condemn the years of bombing that have destroyed the nation of Iraq.
Christian, you want to reply to that before we go to the break?
Sure, ultimately, it's the Syrian people who are talking here. The Syrian people tried, you know, and we'll probably hear from a dissident later on, who have tried peacefully and through nonviolent resistance to change Syria, to create a democracy there. But it just wasn't going to happen. And
why
frankly,
is it
it's
incumbent upon the West to bring
democracy
to Syria? Why is it incumbent upon the United States, France, and Britain to bring democracy to Syria? Why?
Because we have key national interests here, and because Syria has caused significant problems for the U.S.
David, you want to jump in there?
You
Go
have
ahead.
in Syria a nation that has supported...
Go ahead, David, jump in.
Why not assist the nations that are struggling nonviolently against the dictators that still have Western support? Why in Bahrain do we send some of our top cops over there to lead the cracking of the skulls, while in Syria we bemoan the inability to pursue a nonviolent course that we have opposed at every turn?
All righty. Christian, before we go to the break again, go ahead.
Well, Syria, of course... Syria has, you know, killed a great number of American troops in Iraq. They facilitated the flow of foreign fighters in. They sponsored terrorists. They are perhaps the chief sponsor of Hezbollah, along with Iran. They are Iran's mini-me in the area. They're building a nuclear plant. The Israelis had to destroy in 2007. They have chemical weapons stockpiles.
Democracy will change all of that.
No,
this is
Peter, I don't think it's as simple as that. I'm not arguing that it's as simple as that.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the Syrian civil war. And now we're joined by Malik Al-Abdeh in London. He's the director of the policy unit at the Movement for Justice and Development. Does it bother you that the CIA is again working with Islamic fundamentalists and extremists in Syria to bring democracy to the country?
Well, in fact, the West, the United States and Britain, are actually in a sort of arms race against Al-Qaeda, because the rebels in Syria have openly stated that if they do not receive weapons from the West, advanced weapons like Stinger missiles, for instance, that they will look towards Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations around the world to get armed. So the West is in quite a difficult position, because if they do not get arms, then they're perceived not to have any leverage over these rebels. And events in Syria have proven that the SNC, the politicians, have very little influence over what's happening inside the country. In fact, those who have influence are the fighters inside Syria, and they come from different backgrounds, some of them Islamists, some of them less so. And those people are demanding weapons, so the United States and Britain want to support those people in order to have any kind of leverage with them, in order to have influence in any post-Assad Syria.
Okay, Christian, so it's all about leverage. What do you say about that?
I think it should be about leverage. You know, so far the United States hasn't provided arms. I think that's a mistake. I think we should reach out to the more secular
I'm not going to let this go, Christian. Through proxies, they have gotten weapons. American proxies, Saudi Arabia, etc., Turkey, etc.
I would avoid thinking that our $80 billion. I would avoid saying that our $80 billion a year intelligence community is all knowing and all seeing and all doing. That could very well be, as in Libya, Gulf states, and I'm glad they did it, but Gulf states providing weapons because they are directly affected by who wins this fight. So it's not just the United States. But, I think it is important to realize that there are factions here. Unlike Libya, you don't have an overarching government in waiting. As Malik just pointed out, there's a lot of different groups. But we should get in there, work, especially with Turkey and Jordan. They're going to know more than we do about these different groups, since this really is a vital interest of theirs, and try and bias this against the Islamists, against the extremists, and certainly against Al-Qaeda.
Well, David, it looks like Al-Qaeda is doing a good, having success in Syria here. Is this because the West chose certain sides in this conflict?
Well, you know, the United States has made clear by unconstitutional presidential decree, which is a separate problem, that it is supporting with resources these rebels in Syria, allowing other nations allied with the United States to provide the weaponry. And that's the extent of our knowledge. We don't know whether the United States is providing weaponry, but we know that it's not too late for the United States to pull back, to recognize that this has become so difficult on their own terms, in the usual thinking that we have to do nothing or provide weapons and our own military force, that it's not going to work. There's no way it's going to work on its own terms, and that if the United States wants to have influence, it can have influence through working with the regional and international community to scale back, to pursue a ceasefire, and to pursue a non-violent settlement. That is still within reach.
Okay, Malik, what do you think about that? Is that still possible? It looks very unlikely. Is it possible?
I think it's actually still possible, but the important thing is Russia has to exert a lot of influence on Bashar al-Assad, and he has to realize that there is no military solution to this, that eventually that he will have to negotiate with the opposition. At the same time, the United States has to put a lot of pressure and really take some of these Syrian opposition politicians and teach them sort of politics 101, and teach them that they really have to build a constituency, they have to come up with workable demands, and ultimately they will need to negotiate with Bashar al-Assad, not necessarily as the president of Syria, because I think he's lost that legitimacy right now, but I think as the representative of the military establishment in the country, which is the primary vehicle for the protection of minorities, the Syria's minorities, particularly the Alawites. They see the army as the chief vehicle by which their interests are preserved in the country. So we will need to come to some sort of settlement with the military establishment, because at the moment there are probably over 200,000 members of the armed forces who are unlikely to defect, and they're probably going to fight to the bitter end.
Well, Malik, if I can stay with you, I mean, these rebel groups, do they really want to negotiate? They don't. I mean, everyone blames Assad, fine, okay, but the rebel groups don't want to negotiate. That's also part of the problem, and it's not pointed out enough.
Well, I think, look, I think the rebels have been let down by their political leaders, and particularly those in the political opposition, the SNC, and even those who are outside the SNC. I don't think those politicians have given people on the ground a vision for a post-Assad Syria, a democratic vision at all, in fact. In fact, these politicians have led from behind. They've always been playing catch-up with events, and that's been very disappointing. And in fact, you know, the Al-Qaeda's role, which is increasingly becoming public in Syria, Al-Qaeda only thrives on societies where, in particular Sunni Arab societies, where the political leadership has broken down. And we've seen that happen in Iraq, where post-Saddam Hussein, Sunni Arabs were not able to build a cohesive political leadership that can negotiate with the United States and the Shiites in Iraq. And I'm afraid the same thing is happening in Syria right now.
Christian, if I can go back to you in Los Angeles, do you think that's underestimated, the sectarian differences in this civil war, particularly in Western media?
Well, no, I think that they have been, reasonably well appreciated. Of course, it's important to realize various foreign powers' interests in this, and Iran has an interest in supporting the Alawite minority, which is a Shia minority, and Iran is a Shia government, which is one of several reasons why they continue to back Syria. Russia, of course, has its interests, has a naval base at Tartus. So, those are interests that aren't going away. But stepping back, I think that the problem with negotiations is that Assad has crossed several Rubicons that just cannot be undone, if you will. Once you've killed 17,000, 18,000 of your own people, once you're facing sustained military operations by the rebels, it's not just a ragtag, disorganized army. They're looking more organized. They're holding ground intermittently in Damascus, more consistently in Aleppo. They have bases on the Turkish border. So it just looks like it's gone well past the phase. And I should note, earlier on in the war, the rebels were willing to observe a ceasefire, the one that Kofi Annan supposedly got out of Assad. It's just that Assad didn't comply. He used the time to attack the rebels.
Okay, David, if I can go back to you. I mean, one of the reasons why the U.S. openly doesn't call for an invasion of the country is because the rebels themselves are committing atrocities, and the U.S. and the West wants to keep their hands clean. Do you agree with that?
I think that's part of what's causing hesitation here, and I think with this massive killing on both sides, to say that that the good side, the rebel side, cannot negotiate because the other side has killed people is just irrational. I think you're going to have to come to negotiations, and you're going to have to negotiate with someone who has committed horrendous crimes, and the other side is going to have to do the exact same thing. This is how you negotiate a settlement of a war, and the longer it goes on, the more deeply entrenched will become the ethnic and sectarian divisions, and the harder it will be to ever negotiate a peaceful settlement. It's the sooner the better, and to start drawing red lines, as the United States is doing, threatening military invasion if certain types of weapons are used and so forth, or to draw a line and say these people are so evil we will never negotiate with them, is to advocate for war until the society is ruined.
Okay, Christian, you wanted to jump in? Go ahead.
Well, I think the most important thing is that the most humane way to end wars once they've gotten to this stage is to end them rapidly. So far the preponderance of force has been on Assad's side. Same with the preponderance of atrocities. In fact, I know none that the rebels have committed. I'm not saying that hasn't happened, but they seem to be conducting themselves remarkably well within the law of war, considering their limited resources. It's the Assad forces who appear to have intentionally targeted non-combatants, women, children, unarmed men. So the best thing we can do for the people of Syria is, again, to locate among the factions the more secularist, arm them so that they can get this done with faster. That's what stopped the killing in Libya. It wasn't some grand bargain worked out by the UN and people like Kofi Annan. It was finally giving the rebels the means they needed to win on the ground.
Okay, Malik, what do you think about that? Get it over with, okay? Just kill people. Go ahead.
Well, look, I mean,
killing has
Malik in London. Go ahead.
I mean, the West can, of course, intervene. That's always an option. I don't think it's an option right now. I don't think that's on the cards. But the West can intervene. The West can topple Bashar al-Assad if it wants to. But I'm afraid, what will happen is the opposition will find out that it's actually somewhat of a Pyrrhic victory, because the downfall of Bashar al-Assad may precipitate the disintegration of Syria as a unitary state. And I've always predicted this sort of almost a year ago, that if Bashar al-Assad felt that he was about to fall from power, I think he will resort to his own community, the Alawite community. They are a majority in the coastal areas, and they're likely to go their own way. We've got the Druze in the south also. We've got the Kurds who are also gearing up for some sort of autonomy or self-government. We've also got a number of sort of cleavages within Syrian society: rural versus urban, secular versus Islamist, Alawite versus Sunni, Arab versus Kurd, also class divisions. I mean, Syrian society is rather complicated, and there are more divisions than Syrians would be happy to admit. So I think the solution really is for Syrians to be honest with themselves, to have an honest and open dialogue with the support of the international community, and to get away from the language of accusing the other of being unpatriotic, accusing the other of being a terrorist. We need to get a move away from that and really have a constructive dialogue. That's the only way to save Syria as we know it. Otherwise, even if the opposition wins, we may all still end up losing.
All right, gentlemen, we ended on a positive note, surprisingly. Many thanks to my guests today in Los Angeles, Charlottesville, and in London, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.